Well, firstly, we just want to welcome the decision by the Council of Education Ministers for putting the lives of learners as well as teachers first. We think that this is a good decision. And of course, we are also aware that this decision will impact negatively on private schools, which rely solely on money that is paid by parents to ensure that teachers are able to get salaries. So there is a possibility that some of the teachers in the private schools may be affected by this decision. But as I said, we just welcome the fact that this decision will save the lives of especially the teachers and the learners in our schools.
Mr. Makaneta,
and of course, we must
go ahead, sir.
Okay. We must also look at the reality. The reality is that this country has already lost, many lives, particularly as a result of this second wave of COVID-19, which has, as we have seen recently, the variant became more dangerous. And of course, it is dangerous to young people and adults alike, unlike the previous one, which was dangerous to only adults. And we think that the decision by the ministers, will certainly go a long way to preserve lives as and when government prepares for the reopening of schools in mid-February.
You mentioned, Mr. Makaneta, a very important issue there of the payment of school fees. Are parents still obligated to pay for school fees even when their children are actually not attending school?
Well, private schools operate in, they are businesses at the same time. And as we speak, they will obviously do everything they can to make sure that they do online teaching. They send work to learners. We have seen it happening during lockdown in March 2020, where parents were engaged by private schools, even though they were at home. Teachers were able to log into Zoom. Others were using just WhatsApp. And of course, the others were using emails to send academic work to learners. So that is how they will justify the need for payment of fees, even though learners will not be at school. So they are doing that already as we speak. They will be sending in work to learners and parents, even though they are at home, just to make sure that learners do not fall behind. It is learners in public schools who will be falling behind, as nothing will be happening until the 15th of February.
Thank you, Mr. Makaneta. Joining our conversation now is the spokesperson for the South African Democratic Teachers Union, Ms. Nomusa Cembi. A very good afternoon to you, ma'am, and thank you for your time. We were in conversation with Mr. Makaneta regarding the postponement of the reopening of schools. From your perspective as the Democratic Teachers Union, Sadtu, how does this affect the planning for the year that we've already started now? How does this affect the curriculum?
First, let me greet you and greet all the viewers. Let me say that as Sadtu, we welcome the fact that schools will open on the 15th. However, we are not happy with the fact that teachers have got to report on the 25th, because according to science, the virus will be at its peak, and we cannot afford to have about 400,000 teachers to be mobile, going up and down to schools when the virus is at its peak. We feel that this will defeat the whole purpose of delaying the opening, because when people go out to school to work, that's when the virus will spread more. We are aware that the virus is spreading at a fast rate, and we believe that the 25th will just exacerbate the situation. So, and we are not happy with the fact that the department did not consult with us on that matter. We had a meeting with them, but they did not mention that schools, that teachers will have to report on the 25th. we are very much happy. I'm happy with the posture of the department on this matter.
Now, Ms. Cembi, it is our understanding that Sadtu was actually part of the process and part of the negotiations and the meetings with the NCCC. In light of what you've just said now about the teachers going back on the 25th in order to get everything ready, your stance as Sadtu, would you have preferred even a further postponement of the reopening of schools? Would you have preferred perhaps a date in March for the reopening of schools?
No, we would have preferred that teachers, we are fine with the fact that learners are going back on the 15th. We would have preferred that perhaps teachers go back at least a week before the 15th, not on the 20th, because when we calculate, according to the World Health Organization, the peak or the virus should show signs of slowing down over a period of 14 consecutive days. And according to the calculations of science, it was, around about the 14th or around about that time, the virus would have gone down. So would have preferred, the opening to have been at that time when the virus, and we believe that perhaps by that time, the 14th day would have been reached for teachers to report back. On the 25th, according to the readings of the scientists,
let me bring in Mr. Makaneta at this point. Mr. Makaneta, different strokes for different folks here. The private schools that are on a separate calendar to the public schools can, at their discretion, decide at what point they want to reopen, if they want to even close at all, because we do know that some of the private schools have actually already reopened. Your thoughts on that? Does that in any way disadvantage the public schools?
Well, COVID-19 caught us all unprepared, and it has really exposed the gaps that exist between private schools as well as public schools. And of course, private schools have always been ready with their resources. They are over-resourced. We know that in some instances, you find that even the question of learners, long before COVID came, there were classrooms which had less than 20 learners anyway in private schools. So for me personally, I would not have had a problem if the minister also allowed them to carry on. But of course, we know there's been a lot of outcry from communities where people want public schools and private schools to be treated the same. And of course, this goes on to show even the IEB results, the manner in which there's a huge difference. But what I can say is that government needs to come on board, collaborate with the private sector to make sure that they increase the necessary resources in public schools. I mean, Nomusa is correct. I fully agree with her that, teachers in public schools it would have been nice if they were given a chance to come at least a week before, because for the 3 weeks that they'll be at school, basically there will not be much happening, because the whole issue of online teaching and learning is something that is for now foreign in the terrain of public education, because learners do not have access to gadgets, so there will not be any engagement between learners and teachers in public schools. So Nomusa is correct that, they are just wasting their time for the teachers. It would have been nice if they came later, a week just before the learners arrive. But we think that government needs to find a way really to improve infrastructure in our public schools, just to make sure that going forward, we will be able to be on par with our schools in private, terrain, just to make sure that our learners also have access to, gadgets. I know in Gauteng that has been taking place, but the issue of vandalism has been problems in some of the schools. But I know that MEC Panyaza Lisufi has been one of the leading MECs in as far as the bridging the digital divide is concerned.
Let me bring Ms. Cembi in here. Mr. Makaneta brought up a point that we all know, the fact that due to infrastructural challenges, teaching will probably not continue or even start in public schools, while the private schools have the access of online education, which they can actually make use of. Is there talk from the South African Democratic Teachers Union of perhaps moving forward, and how you're going to plan to make sure that you actually do reach your curriculum? We have holidays coming up. There's the Easter break, there are the midterm breaks. As it stands now, will those still go ahead, or will that time be used to catch up for these 2 weeks that the students will be missing?
On that matter, it's not easy to say now whether those breaks will be there or not, because I think what will lead us most is to how this pandemic is happening. But our members, we saw this in with the matrics. When schools opened, they sacrificed the holidays. You know, I remember it was the last holidays in the last quarter, the September holidays. They sacrificed the holidays, and the weekends had early morning classes in order for the learners to catch up. So teachers are always willing to go all out to make sure that learners learn, but we always emphasize that conditions should be conducive. It's not that they do not want to teach, they do not want to work, but conditions, if conditions are not conducive, they cannot operate in such an environment.
Ms. Nomusa Cembi from Sadtu, thank you very much for your insight here.